A millionaire walked the rainy streets of Seattle when a haunting melody stopped him cold. It was the song his first love used to play, The Pianist, a homeless woman with eyes he'd never forgotten. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now enjoy this unforgettable journey of love loss and second chances. The rain had just stopped in downtown Seattle, leaving the pavement glistening like a sheet of glass, reflecting the city's silver skyline. Jack Emerson stepped out of his black town car, buttoning his coat against the breeze. His phone buzzed with boardroom reminders and emails he had no time to read. He was late for a fundraising gala 3 blocks away, but then just as his driver pulled away, a sound stopped him mid-step, a single note, then another. A melody soft haunting rose from the heart of the city, like it had been waiting for him all this time. Jack's breath caught in his throat. That tune, it wasn't just familiar, it was intimate. It was the lullaby of his youth, the song someone once played beneath the rustling trees of Maple Ridge, a town he'd buried deep in memory. He hadn't heard it in 17 years, and yet every note struck his chest like it had been composed for this very moment. His eyes darted through the crowd, searching for the source, and then he saw it, a street piano nestled between 2 food trucks, a few feet from an old movie theater covered in ivy. She was sitting there, a woman. Her coat frayed, her scarf tangled in her wind-blown hair. Fingers moved across the keys like whispers. Delicate, deliberate, devastating. Her head was bowed, eyes closed, as if she were playing not for an audience, but for a memory. Jack couldn't see her face clearly, but something about her posture, the way her shoulders curved protectively around the piano, made his stomach twist. No, it couldn't be. It just couldn't. But his feet were already moving, crossing the street without looking, oblivious to the honking of cars and the world around him. Closer now, 30 feet, 20. And then he saw her hands, the same ones that once picked wildflowers beside him in the fields. The same hands that had traced his face with trembling fingers the night they said goodbye. Jack's world narrowed to a tunnel. The city vanished. All that remained was her. His chest felt hollow and full all at once. He stepped onto the curb, the music swelling in his ears like a tide rising too fast. Her fingers trembled slightly on the final chord. She opened her eyes. Time didn't slow down. It broke. Her gaze lifted and landed on his, and Jack felt his entire past shatter and reassemble in an instant. The same gray-green eyes, deeper now, weathered and shadowed by things he couldn't yet understand. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And then she stood, knocking over the bench, nearly tripping over her own shoes. Jack stepped forward, his voice caught somewhere between disbelief and desperation. "Autumn," he said, not quite a whisper, not quite a cry. But it was too late. She had already turned and started running. She ran like the pavement was fire and he was the flame, pushing past pedestrians, knocking into crates and coffee cups. Her scarf flew from her neck and landed in the gutter. She didn't even glance back. Jack chased her for half a block before he stopped, stunned by the fear he'd seen in her eyes. That wasn't surprise. That was terror. He turned slowly, walking back toward the piano, now silent, now empty. The keys were still slightly warm. He sat on the crooked bench, hands trembling as he touched the same keys she had just played. The song still echoed inside him, no longer soft, no longer beautiful, but like a scream muffled beneath years of silence. He closed his eyes and saw her again. Not the woman on the street, but the girl from the lake 17 years ago. Her laugh, her hair catching the wind. The promise they made beneath the stars, to leave, to start fresh, to never look back. She was the one person who made him believe life could be different. And then she vanished. A note, a lie, a theft. He thought she had left him for money. But if that were true, why was she playing their song? A stranger walked by, paused and asked gently, "Are you okay, sir?" Jack looked up, eyes unfocused, unsure how to answer. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he lied. But he wasn't okay. Not even close. Because in the space of 3 minutes and a melody, the ground beneath everything he believed had just cracked open. Autumn Hayes was alive, living on the streets, and running from him like he was a ghost she thought was dead, or a shadow she feared might still destroy her. Jack stood glancing once more at the abandoned piano. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He ignored his schedule. He skipped the gala, ignored the vibrating phone in his pocket, and walked aimlessly through the city, retracing the streets she had run. But she was gone. Like smoke. Like memory. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse office with the lights off, staring at a photo from high school. Two kids, arms around each other, laughing like the world would never hurt them. She had left. But what if she hadn't wanted to? And somewhere deep in the recesses of Jack's memory, a question whispered, what if someone made her disappear? The thought burrowed beneath his skin, cold and insistent. If Autumn had truly been afraid then, of who? Of what? And why now, 17 years later, was she still running? Jack picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Eli. It's Jack. I need you to find someone for me. Her name's Autumn Hayes. He paused, voice tight. I think she's in trouble. And this time, I won't let her face it alone. 17 years ago, the town of Maple Ridge sat quietly under a sky that always seemed too big for its tiny roads. The streets smelled like pine and old books, the kind of place where secrets lived behind white picket fences, and everyone knew too much about everyone else. Jack Emerson, 17 and restless, spent his afternoons in a red pickup truck with peeling paint, driving nowhere with the windows down, just to feel like he was going somewhere. And beside him, always barefoot in the passenger seat with her sketchbook on her knees, was Autumn Hayes, his best friend, his first love, his only plan for escape. They weren't like the other kids. Jack wasn't cut out for his family's legacy of money and reputation, and Autumn wasn't the type to smile through the judgment of women in Sunday dresses at the market. She played piano at the town library on Saturdays, teaching younger kids scales they'd forget by Monday, and in the evenings she'd sneak into the school's old music room to play for herself. Jack would wait outside in the hallway, sitting on the tile floor listening through the door. She never let anyone watch, but he wasn't just anyone. And when she played, the world felt like it had somewhere to go. They had a plan. Jack was going to turn 18 in June. Autumn would follow a few months later. He had saved just under $2,000 from working at the gas station and doing odd jobs for their neighbors. She gave every dollar she earned teaching piano to the escape fund, folded carefully in an envelope labeled Chicago in her messy handwriting. They didn't want to be rich. They didn't even want to be known. They just wanted to get away. We'll leave this place, she whispered, once her fingers locked in his, under the old elm tree by the creek, and never come back. Jack had kissed her like a vow, and he had meant it. Autumn was light, wild, chaotic light. She'd dance barefoot in the rain, scribble lyrics in the margins of Jack's textbooks, laugh too loudly in quiet places, and cry just as hard when no one was looking. But Jack saw all of it. He knew the way her smile dimmed when her father drank too much, the way her mother's silence echoed louder than any scream. He knew she wore long sleeves in the summer, not because she was cold, but because bruises were harder to explain than mosquito bites. She never talked about it directly, but she didn't have to. Jack noticed. Jack remembered everything. The night before they were supposed to leave, Jack couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the motel in Chicago they'd booked over the phone, the map he kept hidden in his drawer, the worn-out photograph of them he always carried in his wallet. He felt like his chest might split open from hope. At 6 a.m., he grabbed the envelope, tucked it under his jacket, and ran the few blocks to the bank. He could already see her at the train station in her brown boots and denim jacket, smiling like they were finally free. But when he got to the bank and asked to withdraw the money, there was nothing there. "Excuse me," he asked, voice cracking his throat suddenly dry. There must be a mistake. But the teller shook her head, typing with bored fingers. The account was emptied yesterday. A woman named Autumn Hayes closed it out. Jack's ears rang. The air thickened. He stumbled out of the bank like he'd been hit. His hands shook as he ran toward her house, nearly slipping on the gravel road. But the house was empty. The front door stood ajar, and the windows were covered with sheets. It was like she'd never lived there. like she'd been erased. It was Mrs. Lively, the neighbor with the garden full of daisies, who called out to him. "She left, honey," she said gently. "Early this morning. Got into a black car with some man in a suit. She had a suitcase and looked mighty excited." Jack couldn't speak. His lungs were frozen. "She told me to give you this," Mrs. Lively added, handing him an envelope. He stared at it like it might burn his skin. Inside was a note in her handwriting, but it wasn't her words. Not really. "Jack, I'm sorry. I found someone who can give me the life you can't. I took the money. Don't try to find me. It's better this way." He sat on the front porch of her empty house for what felt like hours, rereading the note until the ink blurred with his tears. The words didn't sound like her, but the signature did. Autumn. Just one word. It felt like a knife. His chest burned with betrayal, confusion, and something worse, abandonment. How could she? How could she take everything they built, everything they dreamed, and walk away without a second thought? Jack walked home in silence. He didn't cry again. He didn't tell anyone. But a part of him shut off that day like a light switch and never turned back on. The world moved on as it always does. Jack graduated, left town, and buried that chapter in a grave no one could see. He told himself it was a lesson, that people leave, that love lies, that dreams are for fools. He built his empire on silence, never talking about Maple Ridge, never playing the song she used to hum in the car, never letting another girl into the part of him that once belonged to Autumn Hayes. And whenever someone asked about first love, he'd smile and say, she wasn't real, just a kid fantasy. But deep down, he knew he was lying. Now standing in the middle of Seattle with her music still echoing through his ribs, Jack felt that lie unravel in one excruciating instant. She was real. More real than any deal, any title, any wealth he had ever known. And she hadn't just walked away, she had run. And today, she had run again. But this time, Jack wasn't a boy with a broken heart and no answers. He was a man with power, truth, and 17 years of regret. And he was going to find her, not to accuse, not to punish, but to ask the question that had haunted him since that morning on the porch. Why? The moment her eyes met his, something inside Jack snapped and rewired all at once. It wasn't just recognition, it was collision. The kind that flips your heartbeat inside out. For a second, everything around him, traffic noise, people talking, even the cold wind scraping against his coat, vanished. All that existed was her face, older but unmistakable, and the impossible reality of her standing there. Autumn Hayes. Alive. In front of him. And afraid, visibly, shockingly afraid. Autumn froze like she'd seen a ghost, her fingers still hovering above the piano keys, her breath caught halfway between inhale and scream. Then without a single word, she jolted up so fast, the bench screeched across the pavement. She stumbled backward, knocking into a trash can. Her eyes wide, with something deeper than surprise, something closer to terror. Jack took one tentative step toward her. Autumn. He whispered, his voice barely audible, like saying her name might ground her to reality. It didn't. No. She breathed barely louder than the wind. Then louder. No. Her voice cracked like an old record. She looked down at her hands like they didn't belong to her. Then up again at him, shaking her head over and over. You can't be here, she said, stepping away, almost tripping over the curb. Jack raised his hands slowly, like approaching a wild animal. It's me, he said gently. Jack. But it only seemed to make things worse. Her face went pale as paper. She turned and ran, full speed, like the concrete beneath her feet was on fire, like he was the fire. Jack stood frozen for a split second, his brain trying to catch up with his body. Then instinct kicked in. Autumn, he called out, taking off after her, dodging people and street lamps, ignoring the honks and confused looks. She darted through an alley, knocking over a stack of crates. Her coat flared behind her like a broken wing. She turned a corner so fast she nearly fell. Jack was faster, stronger, but he didn't want to chase her like a predator. He didn't want to scare her any more than she already was. Still, his feet kept moving, driven by the panic in her eyes and the years of silence between them. He turned the corner, and she was gone. just like that. The street was empty, except for a man walking a dog and an old woman pushing a cart. Her scarf lay in the gutter, wet and crumpled, a piece of her left behind like a breadcrumb he couldn't follow. Jack bent down slowly and picked up the scarf, running his fingers over the frayed threads. He brought it to his face, breathing in the faint scent of lavender and dust. His chest ached in ways he didn't know it still could. This wasn't the reunion he had imagined. In his mind, there'd been tears, maybe a hug, at least words. Instead, there was panic and a trail of broken air where she had disappeared. He looked down the alley again, hoping for a glimpse of her silhouette, but she was already part of the shadows. Back at the piano, a small crowd had gathered, murmuring about the scene they had just witnessed. She just ran, someone said, like she saw the devil. Jack ignored them. He sat on the crooked bench she'd abandoned, placing the scarf on his lap like something sacred. His fingers hovered over the keys she had just touched, but he didn't play. He couldn't. The silence was too loud, too heavy. He rested his hands in his lap and stared straight ahead. But he didn't see the street. He saw her face, eyes wide, lips trembling, heartbreaking all over again. 17 years. That's how long he'd believed she left him. That she took the money and ran with someone richer, someone safer. 17 years of building walls around that version of the story. But what he saw in her eyes today, it wasn't guilt. It wasn't greed. It was fear. Pure, gut-deep fear. Jack swallowed hard, his throat burning. What the hell had she been through? And why did she look at him like he was part of it? The memory of her voice. "You can't be here," echoed in his ears like a warning. Or a plea. Jack finally stood, scarf still in hand, and walked back to his car in a daze. He sat behind the wheel for a full 10 minutes, unmoving. People passed. The city carried on. But inside him, everything had tilted. His phone vibrated again, his assistant reminding him of some dinner meeting, something important, something expensive. He turned it off. Nothing mattered now except her. He pulled out his old leather wallet, the one he hadn't touched in years, and found the photo faded, creased, worn thin. 2 kids under a tree smiling like the world would never break them. He ran a thumb over her face and whispered, "What happened to you?" That night, Jack didn't sleep. He stood in his dark apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, the Seattle skyline glittering like a broken promise. He held the scarf like a lifeline and made one phone call. "Eli," he said to the private investigator on the other end. "I found her." A pause. "She's here, in the city. But something's wrong." Jack looked out at the lights, his jaw set. "I need to know what happened 17 years ago. Every detail, every lie, every name. I want the truth, even if it burns." He hung up and stood there until the sun began to rise, painting the world gold, but all he saw was the gray in her eyes when she ran. The next morning, the Seattle skyline looked sterile and cold through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jack's penthouse, but his mind was already far from the boardroom. The sun had barely crept above the horizon when Eli Martin, private investigator, former FBI, and the only man Jack trusted with secrets, knocked at the door. Jack didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. He simply handed over a photo. Autumn, age 17. Her eyes full of music, her smile unknowingly seconds from vanishing. "She was forced to disappear," Jack said, voice tight. "Find out who made her do it and why." Eli took the assignment without a word. He knew the look in Jack's eyes. It wasn't business, it was war. Jack didn't return to work that day. Instead, he opened boxes he hadn't touched in over a decade. Old yearbooks, love notes, cassette recordings of Autumn's songs, newspaper clippings from Maple Ridge. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to walk through every dusty memory. By nightfall, Eli sent his first update. "You were right. Something happened in 2008. 3 days after Autumn disappeared, her parents died in a house fire. Fire was ruled electrical. But there were inconsistencies." Jack's stomach turned. He hadn't known. No one told him. He had been too lost in heartbreak to notice a headline in a town he never wanted to think about again. "What kind of inconsistencies?" he asked. "Too clean," Eli replied. "Fire started in 2 places, living room and kitchen. Accelerants found. But the report was scrubbed. No follow-up investigation. Jack stood frozen in his office, the rain outside beating against the windows like warning drums. They covered it up, he whispered. Someone wanted them gone, and her silenced. By day 3, Eli had a name, Walter Emerson, Jack's father, CEO of Emerson Global, philanthropist, socialite, and as it turned out, a man with ties to a shell company that had funneled money through Autumn's father's accounting firm. Your father's name doesn't appear, Eli said, but he owns the firm that created the shell. It's a spider web, and it gets worse. Jack felt the rage build like a wildfire. How much worse? Eli hesitated. There's a pattern. 3 employees tried to report discrepancies, all gone within a year. 1 moved to Canada, 1 fired for misconduct, 1 dead. Jack stared out the window, gripping the edge of the desk. It wasn't just Autumn who vanished, it was anyone who got too close to the truth. He thought of her running from him, her eyes brimming with fear. Not fear of him, but of what he might still represent. They made it look like she betrayed me, he muttered. They crafted the story, and I believed it. He slammed his fist on the desk, the echo ringing through the silence like a gunshot. I let them ruin her life. That night, Jack pulled up every public record he could find on the Emerson Foundation's investments in the late 2000s. Property buys, quiet acquisitions, charitable donations that ended up as tax shields. He clicked through digital folders until he found one dated 2 weeks before Autumn's disappearance. A confidential file with her father's name on it. Blake Hayes, risk exposure medium to high. Contingency protocol initiated. Jack's blood went cold. Protocol. Like this was a game. Like people's lives were chess pieces. He leaned back, numb, the file glowing on his screen like evidence from a crime he'd never realized was personal. The next day, he drove to his family's estate in Bellevue without calling first. The gates opened like always, the driveway pristine and lined with white roses. But the house for the first time felt like a threat. He didn't wait for the butler. He pushed open the double doors and found Walter in the library, sipping bourbon and reading a financial magazine like the world hadn't just cracked in half. "We need to talk," Jack said. Walter didn't look up. "I assume this is about her." That was all it took. Jack crossed the room and slammed the folder on the desk. "You lied to me," Jack said. "You lied about her, about the money, about everything." Walter didn't flinch. "I protected you, protected the family." Jack's voice dropped lethal and low. "You framed her. You destroyed her. And then you let her parents die." Walter finally looked up, calm as ice. "They were going to destroy us first. Her father had records, emails. If he had spoken, we'd all be in prison." Jack's fists clenched. "So you chose to burn their house down?" Walter didn't answer, just refilled his glass. "You don't understand the cost of legacy." "I understand the cost of silence," Jack snapped. 17 years of it. You turned me into a man who couldn't trust love. And you turned her into a fugitive." Walter leaned back. "She left willingly. Took the money." Jack's laugh was hollow. "You gave her no choice. You threatened her family. You wrote that note." He paused, fury trembling in every limb. "You turned me against the only person who ever truly loved me." For a brief moment, Jack thought he saw something flicker in his father's expression. Regret, no. Just calculation. Jack stepped away from the desk folder still open. Truth finally in the air. If she had died in that fire, would you have even blinked? Walter looked him in the eye. It would have been cleaner. That was it. That was the last straw. Jack turned, stormed out the walls of the mansion, echoing with the silence of generations who kept too many secrets. As he drove back through the night, the sky crackling with a brewing storm, he knew one thing. This wasn't just about finding Autumn anymore. It was about destroying the empire that had broken them both. And it was only the beginning. 3 days after walking out of his father's mansion, Jack Emerson hadn't slept more than a few hours. The things Walter said kept looping in his head like a bad song. The word cleaner still echoed with ice. Jack had lived through betrayal once when Autumn vanished, but this was different. This wasn't heartbreak. This was conspiracy. It was legacy built on silence and scorched earth. Now he was navigating a minefield of half-truths and names erased from ledgers, and at the center of it all was Autumn, still missing, still running, and still the only truth he'd ever known. Eli's latest lead came from a woman at a community shelter on the south side of Seattle. She remembered Autumn, though she knew her only as Anna. Said she played piano for the kids during dinner, that her voice was soft but sad, like someone who didn't expect to be heard. Jack was at the shelter within an hour, gripping a printed photo so tightly it bent at the edges. "You mean the pianist?" the woman asked when she saw it. "Yeah, she comes by sometimes. Doesn't say much, but the kids love her." Jack's pulse surged. "Is she here now?" "Usually around 5, the woman said. "If you're willing to wait." He waited. For 4 hours. Every passing face outside the shelter door made his heart skip. Every woman in a hoodie or scarf made him stand. He'd never been so aware of how many people carried sadness on their backs like invisible backpacks. At exactly 6:42, he saw her walking slowly down the sidewalk, clutching a torn plastic bag. Her posture careful, guarded. Her hair was tied back with an old elastic band, and her coat hung from her like it barely remembered warmth. But she walked with dignity. She still had that. "Autumn." Jack called softly. She stopped mid-step, freezing like a deer on the road. Then she turned eyes wide, lips parting. "No," she whispered. Not with fear this time, but fatigue. She wasn't startled. She was tired of running. Jack walked forward slowly, like one wrong move would break her. "I just want to talk," he said. "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, her voice thin but steady. She stepped toward the shelter, but he blocked her path, not threatening, just present. "Please, 5 minutes. You shouldn't be here," she said. "This isn't your world." "You are," he answered. "You're still my world." She laughed, but it wasn't humor. It was the sound of old pain resurfacing. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't come here like some savior with your tailored coat and billionaire guilt." Jack flinched. "I'm not here out of guilt." Then why, she snapped. "Because I found out what happened. Your parents didn't die in an accident. My father, he found something. About my family's company. Your father covered it up. Threatened him. Threatened you." Autumn's face shifted, anger clashing with confusion. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," Jack said. "I didn't know Autumn. I swear to God. But I know now." She stepped back, shaky, her breath shallow. "You think that changes anything?" she said. "You think saying I didn't know fixes 17 years? Her voice cracked. "You believed I left for money, that I stole from you." Jack nodded, ashamed. "I did. I let myself believe it because it was easier than believing you were in danger." She wiped at her face, furious with her own tears. "And now, what? You want to sweep in and fix me? Rescue me? Put me in some condo and call it redemption?" "No," Jack said quietly. "I just want to give you something you were never given, safety." Autumn stared at him, eyes shining with fury and grief. "You know what it's like to be afraid of your own shadow, to sleep with one eye open for years, to keep moving because you don't know who's still watching." Jack stepped forward. "I do now, because I know who was watching you." She turned her back on him, walked toward the shelter door. "I can't do this," she said. "You should leave." Jack hesitated, then pulled something from his coat pocket, a scarf dirty and frayed. "You dropped this the day you ran." She froze, shoulders stiff. "I've kept it with me, every day since." Autumn didn't turn around, but Jack saw her shoulders shaking. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I'm asking you to let me be on your side now." She opened the shelter door slowly. "I've never had a side," she whispered, and slipped inside. Jack stood outside for a long time, holding the scarf like a lifeline. The door had closed, but she hadn't said no. She hadn't run. That was something. It had to be. That night, Jack returned to his apartment and called Eli. "She's alive," he said. "She's broken. And it's our fault." Eli was silent for a beat. Then I ran background checks on everyone connected to the Hayes case. "There's someone you need to know about." Jack straightened. "Who?" "A man named Marcus Lyon. He used to work as a cleaner for corporate damage control. Your father used him before." "And now?" Jack asked. "Now," Eli said darkly, "he works for Marcelo DeWitt." Jack's blood chilled. Marcelo, the family's most dangerous rival. "And Marcelo's daughter is your fiancée, or at least she was on paper." The pieces clicked together like falling dominoes. If Autumn talked, if the truth came out, the deal with the DeWitts would collapse, and with it half of Emerson Global's empire. Which meant Autumn wasn't just inconvenient, she was a threat, a target. Jack stood heart-hammering. "Eli," he said, "find her again, now. Because if I figured it out, so have they." And for the first time in his life, Jack wasn't afraid of losing everything. He was afraid of losing her again. This time not to lies or silence, but to something far more permanent. Jack didn't knock. He pushed through the double doors of his father's estate like a man who no longer cared about permission. The air inside the mansion felt heavier than usual, suffocating like the walls themselves were ashamed. Walter Emerson looked up from his leather chair by the fireplace, perfectly composed in a silk robe, glass of scotch in hand. "Jack," he said with a mild practiced smile. "I assume this isn't a social visit." Jack's hands clenched at his sides. "You lied to me," he said, voice rough. "Again." Walter raised an eyebrow as if surprised that was even a revelation. About what this time? Jack threw a folder onto the mahogany coffee table. Documents spilled out, old contracts, burner phone records, corporate memos. Walter glanced at them uninterested. "You already admitted it," Jack continued, "that you paid Autumn to disappear. That you ruined her father's life. But now I know that wasn't the end of it. You didn't just manipulate her, you handed her over to people who wanted her gone. You let her parents die." Walter sighed as if Jack were recounting a particularly inconvenient business expense. "I didn't light the match, Jack." "No," Jack said, stepping closer. "You just watched it burn." The room stayed quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. Jack could feel his own heart pounding like a war drum. "You convinced me she betrayed me," he said, the bitterness breaking through his voice. "You knew I loved her, more than anything. And you twisted that into shame." Walter finally stood, setting down his glass. "I did what needed to be done. The girl was a liability. Her father was unstable. And you were young, emotional, reckless. I couldn't let your future hang on some teenage infatuation." Jack laughed, humorless. "Is that what you call love now? A liability?" Walter's expression sharpened. "You were next in line to inherit a legacy that took generations to build. One scandal, one whistleblower, and everything would have collapsed. You think your little romance was worth that risk?" Jack's jaw tightened. "You're not protecting a legacy. You're maintaining a lie. You didn't just buy her silence. You made her believe she was alone, unworthy, disposable." He reached into his pocket and pulled out Autumn's old scarf. "She's been living on the streets, Dad, playing piano at shelters, starving. And you told yourself that was justice." Something flickered behind Walter's eyes, something old and bitter. "I gave her a way out. She took the money. That was her choice." "No," Jack snapped. "You gave her an ultimatum. Leave or watch your family get destroyed. And when that wasn't enough, you framed her. You made sure she had nowhere to go. You made her the villain, so I wouldn't look for her." Walter didn't deny it. He just poured another drink. "It worked, didn't it?" Jack stared at him, disgust curling through his chest. 17 years. I thought she left me for something better. But all she left with was fear. Walter took a long sip before speaking again. "You're angry, I understand. But you're still thinking like a boy in love. You don't see the bigger picture. The people we do business with, they don't play by rules. When Autumn's father started poking around, it wasn't just about us anymore. They saw her as leverage. If we hadn't acted, you could have been hurt. Worse." Jack's face went cold. "So you sacrificed her to save me?" "Yes," Walter said simply, "and I'd do it again." The words hit harder than any punch. Jack staggered back a step, like the air had been ripped from his lungs. "You don't get to say that," Jack whispered. "You don't get to dress up cruelty as protection." His voice cracked. "I would have given everything for her, but you didn't give me the chance." Walter walked to the window, looking out over the dark manicured gardens. "That's because you don't understand power, Jack. You still think the world is built on honesty and love. It's not. It's built on sacrifice, on control, and sometimes on silence. Jack stood in the center of the room, heart splitting between rage and sorrow. You built this empire on the bones of people who couldn't fight back, and you expect me to inherit it. Walter turned back to him, his face like stone. You're not a child anymore. It's time you understood what it costs to hold power in your hands. Jack shook his head slowly. No, I understand now more than ever that this legacy isn't power, it's poison. He stepped toward the door scarf, still clutched in one hand. And I won't be part of it anymore. Walter's voice followed him. You walk away from this and you walk away from everything. Your company, your inheritance, your name. Jack paused at the threshold. Good. Then maybe I can finally build something worth believing in. He walked out into the cold night, the stars hidden behind thick Seattle clouds. The drive back felt longer than usual, the silence inside the car nearly unbearable. He thought of Autumn alone, hunted, forced to survive a life she never asked for. He thought of how easily he had accepted the version of her his father had written. How quickly he'd stopped searching. Regret clung to him like smoke. When he arrived home, he didn't go inside. He sat on the steps of his high-rise, hands shaking, heart hollow. He had finally found the truth, and it had ruined everything. But maybe he thought that was the only way forward. Sometimes the truth has to break you before it can set you free. Jack looked down at the scarf again, then up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, Autumn was still trying to outrun ghosts he should have fought years ago, but not anymore. This time he wasn't walking away. This time he was burning down the lie. And if that meant turning his back on everything he'd ever known his father, his legacy, his last name, so be it. Because love may have failed them once, but now it was the only thing worth saving. The rain was merciless that night, washing Seattle's sidewalks with cold silver sheets. Jack paced outside the shelter. Autumn had vanished into days earlier, his coat soaked through, his eyes scanning every passing figure. She hadn't shown up since that night, the one where she told him she had no side. Eli's messages said there was no sign of her. The workers hadn't seen her, and Jack's heart had grown heavier with each hour of silence. Something was wrong. Deeply, unshakably wrong. He felt it in his bones, like an old injury coming back with the weather. He found her 3 blocks away, half collapsed, near a loading dock behind an old bakery. She was curled on her side, her thin coat drenched her lips, tinged with blue. Her hands shook, clutching a small torn bag with broken headphones and a water bottle half filled with rain. Autumn. Jack dropped to his knees, brushing hair from her face, his voice strangled by panic. Her eyes fluttered open barely. Jack, she whispered, too faint to be sure if she was dreaming. I got dizzy, she mumbled. Didn't eat today. Or yesterday. Her breath hitched, her face tightening in shame. Don't look at me like that. But he did. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. I'm taking you home, he said. Not as a question, but as a promise. She tried to protest, murmured something about being fine, about not wanting help, but her body betrayed her. She couldn't stand on her own. Jack scooped her up, careful but firm, ignoring the stares of 2 pedestrians and the rush of cars passing by. She was so light it frightened him. He hadn't realized until now how thin she'd become. She had survived too long on too little, and now it was catching up with her. In his apartment, he laid her on the couch and wrapped her in blankets warmed from the dryer. He moved with a quiet urgency, making her tea, finding dry clothes from a drawer of things he had bought for no reason except hope. Autumn watched him, her body too weak to stop him, her eyes too tired to keep walls up. You really think a cup of tea can fix 17 years? She said, a ghost of sarcasm in her voice. Jack smiled softly. No, but it might warm your fingers. He handed her the cup with both hands, as if handing her something sacred. She took it. Their fingers brushed just for a second, but it felt like something shifted. A current passed between them, charged with things unspoken. Her hands shook around the ceramic, and Jack sat beside her, careful not to press too close. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because I failed you once, he said. Because I let them make me believe you were something you weren't. Autumn turned away, but he could see her throat tighten, see the way she blinked fast. "I'm not who I was," she said. "Neither am I," Jack replied. "But I never stopped caring." She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away when he gently adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. They stole everything she said quietly. My home, my name, the music in me. I had to become invisible just to stay alive. Her voice cracked on the last word. "But you still played," Jack said. "I heard it. That song, the one you wrote under the maple tree." Autumn let out a breath that sounded like a sob, trying not to be heard. "It was the only piece I had left of myself. The only thing they couldn't take." She looked up, her eyes glassy. "You remembered it." Every note, Jack said. "It played in my head every time I couldn't sleep." He hesitated, then added, "I think part of me always hoped I'd hear it again. That maybe if I did, I'd find you." Autumn stared at him for a long, silent moment, something unreadable shifting in her gaze. "I don't know how to let you in," she whispered. "I don't even know if I want to." Jack nodded. "That's okay," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything right now. I just want you to know you're safe." He stood to leave her in peace, but her voice stopped him. "Stay," she said. Just one word, but it changed everything. He sat back down beside her, close enough to feel her shivering subside. Minutes passed in silence, but it wasn't the kind that hurt. It was something closer to healing. Jack glanced at her, curled in his blanket, eyes closed, but breathing easier. "You know," he said softly, "when we were 17, I used to imagine our first apartment together. You'd have a piano in the kitchen. I'd burn all the toast. And every morning we'd dance like idiots before work." Autumn chuckled quietly. "You were such a dreamer." "I still am," he admitted. "Except now I know dreams have to survive fire to mean anything." Autumn looked at him. Really looked. Not the billionaire headlines, not the name that came with shame, but the boy who once sat in the hallway outside her piano room waiting with a peanut butter sandwich and a flashlight. "I used to believe in us," she whispered. Then everything broke. Jack reached for her hand, slow, gentle, as if asking permission from her past. "Maybe some things are worth putting back together," he said. She let him hold it. And for the first time in 17 years, neither of them pulled away. Outside, the rain softened into a hush. Inside, two people who had once been strangers in their own story began to sit in the silence without fear. Jack didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He just stayed beside her while she drifted to sleep, her hand in his, the blanket tucked around her like a shield. And as the city lights flickered against the windows, Jack made a silent vow, no matter how long it took, no matter what they had to face, he would stay. Because for the first time in a lifetime, Autumn Hayes was not alone, and neither was he. For the first time in years, Autumn woke to warmth. Not the scratchy kind from cheap motel blankets or the heat of panic racing through her body, but the soft, steady kind that came from safety. Morning light spilled across the living room where she'd fallen asleep, curled up on Jack's couch, his coat still wrapped around her like armor. The air smelled like coffee and toasted bread. She blinked, sitting up slowly, and there he was, Jack standing in the kitchen in a hoodie and bare feet, humming a tune she once played in the rain. Her chest tightened. How was it possible that nothing had changed, and yet everything had? "Morning," he said with a sheepish smile, holding out a mug. "It's not the diner from Maple Ridge, but the coffee's strong enough to wake the dead." Autumn took the mug, their fingers brushing, and tried not to feel how natural it all was. She hadn't woken up in anyone's home in years, hadn't trusted herself to. But here now, in this quiet pocket of borrowed peace, her heart did something strange. It softened. "You remember the diner?" she asked. "They used to serve hash browns like bricks." Jack grinned. "And you always asked for extra ketchup." She smiled before she could stop herself. That day passed in gentle moments. Autumn napped again, ate a full meal, even laughed when Jack burned a grilled cheese sandwich. She wandered the apartment, tracing her fingers over sheet music on his piano, watching the skyline blink awake in the windows. They didn't talk about the past, not the fire, not the lies, not the years that swallowed them whole. But between every silence was something unspoken, a question neither of them had the courage to ask yet. Could this be the beginning of something again? That night, Jack showed her a folder filled with designs. "It's a music initiative," he said. "I want to launch it across public schools, restore broken pianos, hire instructors. You'd lead it." Autumn blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "You've got the soul of it. And kids need more than textbooks and screens. They need something real." Her throat closed up. "Jack, I don't what if I'm not enough anymore." He stepped closer. "Then I'll remind you who you are. Every damn day if I have to." There was silence between them, electric trembling. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. Later that week, Jack invited her to join him at a charity event supporting the arts initiative. "You don't have to perform," he said. "Just be seen, be heard. As you." She hesitated, but then she looked in the mirror that night, really looked. Her dress was simple, her hair loose, her scars still invisible, but present. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone trying to disappear. She walked into the venue beside Jack, her hand tucked lightly into his arm, the cameras flashing like she mattered. The night glowed with champagne and string music. Donors clinked glasses. Artists shared stories. Jack gave a brief speech, his eyes catching hers across the room. "Music saved me once," he said. "And I believe it can save others too." People clapped. Autumn felt something bloom in her chest. She was proud of him, proud of who he'd become. And maybe, just maybe, she was proud of herself for surviving long enough to stand beside him again. But just as the night reached its brightest point, the air shifted. Autumn saw her Eliza Monroe, tall, polished, laughing too comfortably beside Jack's assistant. Then Eliza crossed the room and greeted Jack with a familiarity that tightened Autumn's stomach like a vice. "You never called Eliza purred," brushing something off Jack's lapel. "Is this the part where I'm supposed to be heartbroken?" Jack chuckled awkwardly, taking a step back. "Eliza, this isn't the time." But Autumn had already seen enough. Her heart plummeted. Of course he had someone else, someone appropriate, someone safe. She slipped away before he noticed, into the hall, down the stairs, out into the cold Seattle air. The night wrapped around her like it had always meant to take her back. She walked until her heels blistered, until the city blurred, until the tears dried into salt on her cheeks. How could she have been so stupid? So quick to believe in warmth again? She was a story he had already finished. One he returned to out of guilt, not love. Jack found her, 3 hours later, sitting on the edge of a fountain, her arms wrapped around herself. "You left," he said, breathless. "You didn't even say goodbye." "Didn't want to ruin your night," she replied, her voice brittle. "You looked happy with her." Jack blinked, confused. "Eliza." "That was nothing. It didn't look like nothing," she snapped. "It looked like everything I'm not." He knelt in front of her, hands shaking. "Autumn, listen to me. She's part of the world I'm leaving behind. You're the only thing that feels real in any of this. You're the only one I want to come home to." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then why does it still hurt so much?" Jack took her face in his hands gently. "Because we haven't healed yet. But we will. Together." The wind swirled around them, but the city noise faded. Autumn leaned into his touch, her heart still bruised but finally beating for something that wasn't fear. And as he pulled her into his arms beneath the streetlight, she let herself believe just for a moment that maybe this wasn't a second chance. Maybe it was the first real one. Autumn didn't sleep that night. She lay on the edge of the bed in Jack's guest room, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed beneath them, 1,000 lives moving forward while hers stood still. His words echoed in her chest. "You're the only one I want to come home to," but doubt clung to them like static. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the image of Eliza's hand on his chest, that smirk like ownership, kept playing on a loop. It wasn't what Jack said that haunted her. It was what he didn't. By morning, something inside her had hardened. Jack had given her warmth shelter, a reason to hope again. But she'd spent years building armor, and love had a way of slipping through cracks, then turning to knives. When she stepped into the kitchen, Jack looked up from the table with that same gentle smile. "I made breakfast," he said, pointing to pancakes that were a little too brown on the edges. "Hope you're hungry." She forced a nod, but her chest was tightening. Every small kindness made it worse. Made her feel like a visitor in someone else's happy ending. She picked at the food, barely tasting it. Jack watched her, noticing the shift. "You okay?" he asked softly. Autumn looked up, her eyes guarded. "Why didn't you tell me about Eliza?" Jack blinked. "What?" "The engagement. The partnership. The fact that she still thinks she has a claim on you." His jaw tensed. "That was arranged by my father. For business. It's over." "Is it?" she asked, voice quieter now. Because she didn't look like someone who got the memo. Jack exhaled. "Autumn, I didn't tell you because it meant nothing. Because you are what matters now." She stood slowly, her voice shaking. "I'm tired of being someone's now. I've been hidden, erased, replaced while you built an empire and left the past behind like it was an inconvenience." Jack stood too. "That's not fair. You think I haven't suffered? You think I didn't look for you in every city, every piano bar?" "No," she said bitterly. "You thought I betrayed you, that I took the money and ran. And you believed it because it was easier than believing in me." Her words hung heavy between them, brutal in their truth. He stepped closer, wounded but not retreating. "I believed what I was shown. I was 17. I was angry. And I hated myself for ever trusting you." That last part cracked something in her. She turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Then why now? Why fight for me now?" Jack didn't hesitate. "Because I finally know the truth, and because I never stopped loving you, even when I didn't know how to forgive you." She laughed, but it was hollow. "Love's not enough, Jack, not when the past is still chasing us both." She packed her bag in silence. He stood in the doorway, helpless, watching her fold the clothes he'd washed for her just days before. "Don't go," he said. "Please." Autumn looked up, her face calm, but her eyes full of storm. "I need to find myself outside of you, outside of this." "You don't have to run anymore," he whispered. "I'm not running," she said. "I'm surviving. There's a difference." She slipped the scarf, the one he'd held on to for 17 years, into her pocket. "Thank you for keeping this, but I can't be your second chance, not until I'm my own first." The elevator ride down was silent. Jack didn't follow. He stood in the doorway as the doors closed between them, the look on his face, something between devastation and understanding. Autumn stepped into the morning light, the world moving around her like a movie she no longer starred in. Her chest ached, but her feet kept moving. She didn't know where she was going, just that she couldn't stay. Not yet, not like this. Jack spent the rest of the day staring at the piano she'd played the night before. Her fingerprints were probably still on the keys. Her laughter still lingered in the room like perfume. He thought about calling her, chasing her, begging her to stay. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was respect. Or maybe it was the knowledge that real love doesn't chase, it waits. That night he returned to the rooftop they once visited during the early days of her return. The city stretched out in gold and silver, indifferent to his grief. He sat on the edge, looking out, holding her scarf in his lap like a memory he didn't know how to let go of. He had nearly lost her once to lies and fire. Now he might lose her again to freedom. And maybe that was the price of love, letting someone walk away so they could come back on their own terms. Far across the city, Autumn sat at a bus stop, her backpack beside her, her fingers absently tracing a melody into the metal bench. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just closed her eyes and whispered into the night, "Don't wait too long, Jack." And though neither of them could hear the other in two different corners of a city that had broken and rebuilt them, they both held on to the same thing, a hope that love once lost might still find its way home. The night of the gala arrived under a sky that threatened rain but held its breath. The event was meant to be a celebration, the official launch of Jack's National Music Initiative. Hundreds gathered in the art museum's atrium, the air thick with champagne-polished shoes and curated praise. But Jack barely noticed any of it. His eyes kept flicking to the entrance, his chest tightening every time the doors opened. She hadn't replied to his messages. No calls, no notes, just silence. And yet part of him still believed she'd come. Because this wasn't just about a program or a speech, it was about her. He stood behind the curtain hands in his pockets, heart drumming like a solo. The MC's voice echoed across the marble floors. And now, to close tonight's event, the man behind the Music for Tomorrow initiative, Jack Emerson. Applause thundered, but Jack barely heard it. He stepped onto the stage, not with the confidence of a billionaire, but with the heart of a man who had lost and learned and now stood in front of a crowd, not to impress, but to confess. "Thank you," he began, clearing his throat. "When I started this project, I told everyone it was about giving kids a chance to feel seen. But the truth is, it started because I lost someone who once made me feel that way." The room quieted. No more clinking glasses, no more whispers, just him and his truth. 17 years ago, I fell in love with a girl who played piano better than anyone I'd ever met. She believed in music and freedom, in second chances. I let her go because I believed a lie, because I was too blind to fight for the truth. He paused, looking out at the crowd. Somewhere near the back, a woman had just entered. Her coat was damp from the drizzle outside, her eyes wide with disbelief. Autumn. "Tonight, I don't want to talk about numbers or success," Jack said, his voice thickening. "I want to talk about love and forgiveness and the miracle of someone surviving heartbreak and still learning how to heal." People began turning, noticing her too. But Jack didn't stop. He couldn't. "She's the reason I believe in this. She's the reason I remember who I am." Autumn froze at the edge of the room, unsure whether to turn back or run forward. But Jack stepped off the stage, walked straight toward her, not rushed, not rehearsed, just real. "You don't have to say anything," he said when he reached her. His voice dropped quiet enough for only her to hear. "I just need you to know this entire thing this night. These people, none of it means anything without you." Her eyes shimmered, lips parting, trying to form words that hadn't existed until now. "You stood on stage," she whispered, "and told them everything." Jack nodded. "I didn't want to hide you again. I'm done hiding anything. I'm done being the man who lives for what he's supposed to be. I want to be the man who shows up for who he loves, even if he's late." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't brush it away. He reached for her hand, slowly offering it like an invitation, not a demand. "Will you stay?" he asked. "Not just tonight, not just for the program, but for whatever comes next. I don't know how to promise perfect, but I can promise real. And I can promise you'll never be alone again." Autumn let out a shaky breath. "I didn't come here for the speech," she said. "I came because I needed to know if you still saw me. Not who I was, but who I am now." Jack's hand tightened around hers. "I see you," he said. "I've always seen you, even when I didn't understand." The room had faded now. There was no crowd, no applause. Just two people who had broken and rebuilt, standing in the light of 1,000 second chances. "We don't have to rush," he added. "We don't have to fix everything overnight." She smiled, tearful but sure. "Maybe we just begin again." And so they did. That night, they didn't drive off into a fairy tale or disappear into fantasy. They stayed, together. They watched the final performance, a children's choir singing the very song Autumn had once composed under a tree in Maple Ridge. Her eyes never left Jack's, and his hand never left hers. They were no longer ghosts of who they used to be. They were present, alive, forged in fire, but walking forward into something beautifully unknown. Outside, the rain had stopped, The city glistened under street lamps like it had been washed clean. Jack and Autumn stepped into the night together not as a man and a girl with a tragic past, but as two survivors ready to write something new. Not perfect, not polished, but honest. And for the first time in a long, long time, love didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a beginning. The morning after the gala sunlight spilled into Jack's penthouse like a silent promise. The city buzzed below them, oblivious to the choice that sat heavy in Jack's chest. Autumn lay curled beside him on the couch, still asleep, her breath slow and even. He watched her, memorizing the calm in her face, the way her fingers had curled slightly over the edge of his sweater. For the first time in years, he felt whole. But he also knew the storm outside hadn't passed. It was only beginning. The headlines had already started. Heir of Emerson Empire declares love in stunning on-stage confession. Some called it reckless. Others called it romantic. But Jack didn't care about the spin. He cared about her, about protecting what they had rebuilt from the ashes. And he knew now without doubt that as long as he remained part of his father's world, they would never be safe. Not from the whispers, not from the legacy, and certainly not from the men still pulling strings in shadows. Autumn stirred awake eyes, blinking toward the light. "You're staring," she murmured. Jack smiled softly, trying to freeze this moment. She sat up, brushing hair from her face. "What are you thinking?" He hesitated, then said the thing that had been forming all night. "I'm walking away. From Emerson Global. From the board. From everything tied to my father's empire." Autumn froze, the weight of his words settling between them. "Jack, I've made my decision," he said firmly. "This legacy, it's built on pain, on lies. I can't drag you through that again." "You're not dragging me," she whispered. "I chose to be here." "I know," he replied, "but it's not enough to love you in secret or even in front of a crowd. I need to build something that isn't made from his blueprint." She reached for his hand. "But it's your family, your name." Jack shook his head. "It's not who I am. Not anymore. I don't want to spend the rest of my life cleaning up his messes. I want to spend it making music with you, creating something honest, starting over." Later that afternoon, Jack stood in front of the Emerson Global boardroom, mahogany table, leather chairs, a dozen men and women who had watched him grow up in shadow and expectation. "I'm resigning," he said calmly. "Effective immediately." A gasp, a shuffle of papers. "You're joking," one of them said. Jack smiled. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Someone else leaned forward. "Do you realize what you're walking away from?" Jack glanced at the towering skyline outside. "Yes. And it's the easiest decision I've ever made." Walter Emerson arrived moments later, summoned by a panicked board member. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked, storming into the room. Jack turned slowly. "What you were never brave enough to." Walter's face darkened. "This isn't a noble gesture. It's suicide." "No," Jack replied. "Staying would be. Staying would mean becoming you." Walter stepped closer, voice low. "And what will you have without this company?" Jack's eyes flickered. "Her. A life I'm proud of. And that's more than you've ever had." That night, Jack returned home and found Autumn on the balcony, wind tousling her hair. She turned when he slid the door open, searching his face for answers. "It's done," he said. "I'm free." Autumn walked to him slowly, emotion rising in her throat. "You really did it?" He nodded. "I left it all behind." "For me," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "For us. For the man I want to be. For the life we deserve." She touched his face, fingers trembling. "No one's ever chosen me like that." "Then they were fools," Jack murmured. "Because loving you is the most certain thing I've ever known." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as the city lights shimmered in the distance. "We can go anywhere now. Do anything." "What do you want, Autumn?" She smiled against his chest. "A quiet life. A little studio with a worn-out piano. Kids, maybe. And mornings where we don't have to run." Jack leaned back, cupping her face. "Done. All of it. 1,000 times over." She kissed him slow, grateful, breathless, and he kissed her back like the future was already written. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the headlines, not the legacy, not the empire he'd left behind. There was only the music between them, the rhythm of hope restored. Later, as they sat together at the piano, his fingers fumbling over chords, hers guiding them with laughter, Jack realized something profound. Real love doesn't just heal old wounds. It redefines them. What once was a scar became a symbol of survival. What once was a goodbye became a beginning. And in that golden hour of twilight and melody, Jack Emerson finally became the man he was always meant to be hers. 1 year later, the maple trees in Maple Ridge were in full bloom again. Red gold and amber leaves danced through the late September breeze, blanketing the sidewalks like a memory that refused to fade. The town had changed, but not too much. The old diner still served burnt hash browns. The music store still had a cracked window that no one fixed. But the abandoned lot where the Hayes house once stood, now it held something new, a music conservatory. Brick by brick, it had risen from silence, a place where second chances could breathe. Inside, laughter echoed down the halls as kids ran between practice rooms, violin cases swinging from their shoulders. The grand piano in the lobby gleamed beneath the morning light. At its bench sat Autumn, her fingers dancing effortlessly over the keys, a melody both old and reborn. She wore a soft sweater, hair pinned up a pencil behind one ear. Her smile wasn't guarded anymore. It was real, earned. Around her neck hung a silver pendant Jack had given her on their not-a-wedding anniversary, engraved with the words, "Home is where you're loved." Jack entered from the back carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a box of cinnamon rolls. His suit was gone, replaced by jeans, a flannel shirt, and a look of quiet joy that no boardroom had ever given him. He leaned in, placed a kiss on Autumn's cheek, and whispered, "They're here." Autumn turned toward the entrance just as the first group of kids filtered in for class. One little girl beamed and waved. "Hi, Miss Autumn. Good morning, sweetheart," she called back, heart warm. Jack took her hand beneath the piano. "Ready always," she said. After class, Jack took a stroll down Main Street. The town still looked at him with curious eyes, but less suspicion now. Some waved, some nodded. A few still whispered, but it didn't matter. He'd learned something important: when you stop chasing approval, you start discovering who you were meant to be. And for Jack, that man didn't wear a tie or sign million-dollar contracts. He showed up, he stayed, and he loved out loud. They lived in a modest house on the hill, just far enough from town to see the stars. Every night, Jack and Autumn lit a fire, curled up on their creaky couch, and played records they once loved as teenagers. Sometimes they danced barefoot in the kitchen. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just held each other and let the silence feel safe for once. There were no headlines anymore. No family legacy to uphold. Just their own. Autumn still had bad days. Some mornings, the past came back like smoke in her lungs. Some nights, she woke up reaching for a version of herself she thought she'd lost. But now she wasn't alone in it. Jack never asked her to smile when she didn't want to. He simply held her hand, brewed her tea, and played her song until she came back home. Healing wasn't linear, but love, real, honest, stubborn love was. One afternoon, as golden leaves fell outside the studio windows, Autumn sat beside a teenage girl at the piano. The girl had scars on her arms and shadows behind her eyes. "I can't do it," she whispered. "I don't belong here." Autumn smiled gently. "Neither did I," she said, "but I stayed anyway. And slowly the music found me again. It'll find you too." The girl's eyes welled with tears, but she placed her fingers on the keys, and for the first time in months, she played. That night, Jack watched Autumn from across the room, her laugh echoing through the conservatory as the staff celebrated their first full year. He raised his glass. "To the woman who taught me that truth matters more than legacy, that love is louder than lies, and that it's never too late to start again." She blushed, cheeks flushed with the firelight. To the man who stayed, she replied, "Even when it hurt, even when I told him not to." Their eyes met, and the applause faded into something deeper. As the night wore on, Jack and Autumn stepped outside, the stars sharp and endless above them. He wrapped an arm around her waist and she leaned her head on his shoulder. "Think we made it?" she asked softly. Jack smiled. "No," he said. "I think we're still making it. One note at a time." She laughed. "Sounds like a song." "Everything we've lived," he said, "was always a song. We just finally stopped playing it in the wrong key. And maybe that's what this story was all along, not just a romance, but a reminder. That love can survive betrayal. That silence can turn into song. That even broken people can build something beautiful if they choose to fight for it. So maybe the question isn't whether Jack and Autumn found their happy ending, but whether you still believe in second chances too. If you had one more shot at love, truth, or courage, would you take it?